Hey everybody, this is Kyle Lacey from OpenView. Welcome to Hug Your Haters, a community call with Jay Baer. Before I introduce Jay, I want to briefly introduce OpenView. OpenView is a venture capital firm based in Boston that focuses primarily on expansion stage software companies, where we acquire, retain, and help them grow the right customers and talent. You, of course, find out more on openviewpartners.com or on Twitter or any of those social sites. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Jay. I've known Jay for a long time. We lived in the same state. We've been a part of the same groups. Jay's a much cooler person than I am, and he has way better books than I do. So Jay, welcome to the community call with OpenView.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Fantastic to be on the community call. I appreciate your kind but untrue words, and always nice to work with my friends at OpenView. Doing great work. Love the new rebranding. Congratulations on that. Super cool. Looks awesome.
Thank you. So let's dive right in. And, of course, we're going to talk to Jay for probably about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some questions from the audience, and we'll go from there. So, Jay, new book, Hug Your Haters. Congratulations, by the way. Give us the 30-second pitch around the book, what it's about, what people would get out of it.
Well, it turns out, Kyle, that customer service, customer success is being disrupted in the same ways that marketing has been disrupted, and actually for the same reasons. It's social media, mobile, millennial culture, consumer technology changes, etc. There's like 500 books written about marketing disruption, including some by you and some by me. There's now one book written about customer service disruption. So everything you think you know about customer service, Hug Your Haters will prove that you don't know what you think you know, and that customer service is now the new marketing.
So you say hug your haters. Can you define who the haters are, like in the book? Is it like what is the definition of a hater?
So in the parlance of the book, it's anybody who expresses negativity about your business or your brand, and that negativity can be expressed via traditional channels like phone or email, or via social media, review sites like Yelp, TripAdvisor, in a B2B context, Spiceworks, G2 Crowd, TrustRadius. Or on discussion boards and forums, some perhaps owned by your brand, others third party. There's lots and lots and lots of places that people can complain and interact with businesses now, including new stuff like Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and even Instagram, LinkedIn. Whereas not that long ago, in the big scheme of things, if you wanted to interact with a business, you could go face-to-face, telephone, or letter. That was pretty much your three options. Now, the options are quite numerous, and that creates a lot of challenges for business, but also a lot of opportunities. So when we talk about haters in the book, what I really mean is anybody who has negative things to say about your business.
Perfect. And you know our audience is mainly software, B2B primarily.
Of course.
You talk a lot about customer service. We talked a lot about customer service while we were marketing this call. How does that apply to software? How does customer service apply to software? Should they think about it the same way as consumer companies are doing it?
Oh, 100%. In fact, I would argue perhaps more so. Let me give you a couple of data points here, Kyle. So everybody on this call knows that it makes business sense to keep the customers you've already earned instead of constantly churning customers and having to replace them, right? I mean, churn is a key metric for all SaaS businesses, right? It's a major number on the scoreboard. But we don't actually run companies according to that plan. Not really. Not in aggregate. If you look at the numbers worldwide, businesses in total spend about $500 billion a year in marketing and about $9 billion a year in service. Now, that doesn't really make any sense when you realize just how important retention is. In fact, just a 5% increase in customer retention, which is almost nothing, right? 5% is nothing. A 5% increase in retention can increase profits by 25 to 85% because of the geometric impact of retention. And so there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of growth hackers in the software business. In fact, there's probably growth hackers listening right now. You know what you never hear about, Kyle? You never hear anybody say that they're a retention hacker. And that's a problem, because we should be focused on retaining customers first and getting customers second. Look, I'm an investor in tons of B2B companies, including some that you guys are invested in OpenView. I know how important acquisition is, but acquisition doesn't do you any good at all if the customers are leaving out the back end. That's why when I look for companies to invest in, I look for companies that have a really strong customer success team and very strong customer success principles, many of which follow the advice and hug your haters.
Well, so on the same lines, in our first discussion, when you and I talked about the book for our lab site, you said something about that you believe brands have less than an hour to respond to customers. Can you go a little bit more in detail on that?
That's not entirely the case. Here's the research, and I should say that this book, Hug Your Haters, is not just like Jay thinks this is a good idea. Jay wants you to be good at customer service, although I do.
Right.
This book is grounded in a massive proprietary research project into the science of complaint. So we talk to thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are consumers of all kinds of products, travel, restaurants, software, cars, everything in between, to figure out who complains and where they complain and why. So when I give you a number, I give you advice, it's not just like this seems like a good idea. This is grounded in actual science. The data that we uncovered in the research for Hug Your Haters show that 40% of people who complain in social media expect a response within 1 hour. Now, not everybody complains in social media. And some people in social media never get a response, and they don't expect a response. Those who are actually using Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, even Google+, in some rare circumstances, as a contact mechanism, I think it's safe to say that if you can answer them within an hour, you're in pretty good shape. Now, do you have to answer everybody within an hour? Probably not, but operationally, in the consulting work we do in these areas, I always find it much easier to say, look, here's our internal SLA. We're going to answer everybody within this amount of time, period. That way you're not having to pick and choose.
So negative, from a software perspective, negative complaints usually have to do with UI or the experience of the product. In your opinion, how should a software company actually hug their haters and take that feedback back to product? Because you don't take all feedback back to product, and your product roadmap shouldn't be just a series of complaints and how you're trying to fix them. Do you have an opinion on how a software company should do that, like actually hug their haters so they make their product better?
Well, there's a few different approaches there. One is to acknowledge all customer complaints and feedback, right? So even if you can't fix it, even if that customer has a ridiculous idea that will never be built into the product, you owe it to that customer to acknowledge that they have taken their time to express their opinion to try to make you better. Now, look, I want to make sure people understand here, I'm not suggesting the customer is always right, because sometimes the customer is manifestly wrong, but the customer should always be listened to. Because if you answer just one customer in social media, you can increase that customer's advocacy by 25%. Now, at scale, that has a significant and material impact on your business. And if a customer is so unhappy that they complain and they're thinking about bailing, like I'm not going to buy your software anymore, I'm going to cancel my license, solving a customer's problem keeps that customer 70% of the time. So from a very routine perspective, hugging your haters just means answering every complaint in every channel every time. Just answer everybody always. That's step one. Now, in terms of the question of how do you build that into the product, what you want to do is set up a system so that your frontline folks, your customer success team, is actually keeping track of all customer feedback and then analyzing it and then summarizing it for product and say, okay, in the last month we had these emails, these calls, these tweets, these Facebook posts, these posts to our discussion boards and forums. Let's pull together key issues, a word cloud, it's sentiment analysis. Let's give them some reports that say, here is the various weight and sort of acuteness of this commentary so that they can make some sort of judgment call on which things to address first.
Got it. So you said customer service, customer success teams. I've seen there's quite a few companies that mix up the two and also keep them separate.
Yeah.
What do you think is best practice on a B2B software company with a customer success team and a services team? Because one could be quota bearing, right, with upsell, and one not, or both. Like, do you have a best practice for that people should be thinking about?
I think you want to have one person or one group in the organization whose interests lie with the customer, who do not carry a quota, whose responsibility it is to be that retention hacker. And it's impossible to be a retention hacker if you're carrying a quota. It's obviously at cross purposes. And so while I'm always reluctant to say have more departments and more people, because ultimately your end user doesn't give a shit about your org chart, and they shouldn't have to. They just want their problem solved. But at the end of the day, I feel like the best outcomes in terms of hugging your haters and turning customer service into marketing is when the customers can deal with people who have no ulterior motive and no secondary sort of metrics or rewards based on sales.
Got it. Now,
so if you want to bonus your team on retention and say, look, customer success peeps, here's the thing: we're going to set this up so that every customer you keep, or we're going to bonus people based on churn reduction, or if we hit these thresholds not on customer acquisition but on a tiny little bit of customer defection, I think that's amazing. I mean, I would love to see more B2B companies do that. Software companies say, look, let's start putting financial rewards around churn instead of only financial rewards around acquisition.
Right. So put yourself in the shoes of some of your investments, earlier stage investments. How should a company be thinking of hug your haters, customer success, customer service, everything that we're talking about from a scale perspective? Especially if over the course of a 4-year period of time they're growing at 100% plus every year. Are there any tips or suggestions on how they keep that idea of loving the customer, making sure that you're hugging the haters, all that idea that's in your book? How do they keep it viable while they're scaling?
There's a 5-point plan for scale that I just invented in my head while you were talking. We should write an ebook together. We should write an ebook together on this. So the 5 points you got to think about are personnel. So as you get more customers, you have to have more people to help those customers. So you need to have sort of a 3-tiered plan for personnel. So we start with 1, and then we have 10, and then we have 100. How do we scale those people? Second point is channels. So do you start with all channels and you reach us anywhere at any time? Probably not, because you don't have the people to support it. So as you get bigger, you add more contact mechanisms. So for example, lots of software companies have their own community, their own sort of web-based support community using Get Satisfaction or something along those lines. Usually that's a mid-stage or late-stage play, so that might be something on the scale roadmap that eventually you roll out a customer support community where the customers themselves can help solve some of the problems themselves without the company itself getting involved. That would be a sort of a channel scale issue. Third would be policies. So as you get bigger, as you scale, you may need to adjust your internal policies for what your frontline responders can and cannot do. Practical example: as you get bigger and you've got more and more people reaching out to you, especially in times of crisis or outages, you may need to have pre-approved legal responses. The legal says, yes, this is okay, that they can copy and paste but then adjust for empathy. You never want to just straight copy and paste because it sounds like a robot, but you can use those as seed corn to be able to respond more quickly in circumstances where that's necessary. That would be a scaling point. Fourth would be software. Certainly at scale, you're going to need some sort of software assistance, not only to keep track of all your customer inquiries, but also, as we mentioned a moment ago, for advanced practitioners, taking all customer feedback and mining it to say, okay, what's important here and what's worthy of talking to product about. That's where you might use something like Clarabridge or tools along those lines. And then the fifth piece of that, the fifth kind of point on the star would be measurement. So over time, as you get more customers and more opportunities, you should adjust your measurement and how you do math around customer success, obviously retention, but things like effort score. So, for example, you ask a random sample of your customers who have interacted with the customer success team, how easy was it on a scale of 1 to 10 to get your answer or get your problem solved? Right? So what you're trying to do is measure effort, which has a direct impact on retention and satisfaction, and you may not want to do that kind of survey work as a small company because it takes time and money, but eventually you will. So those are the 5 points: labor, channels, policies, software, and measurement.
Very good, Jay. Okay,
I feel pretty good about it because I literally just invented that, so I feel good about that opportunity.
Well, there you go. You got a follow-on book.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Let's just write that up.
Right. From a software perspective, what would you call the retention stack? Much like any marketing stack, like what should people be looking at, and how is that divided across different sizes of companies? You said get satisfaction. There's some other ones that you brought up, but what should somebody be thinking about as a small, early stage to a growth stage company, depending on customer size and customer volume, of course?
So from a pure stack standpoint, from a stuff you might need to buy, some sort of social listening tool, of course, which may or may not be paired with a social engagement tool. As you well know, that industry is bifurcated a little bit, and now you have some tools that really specialize in listening and some tools that really specialize in response. Some are combined. So you're going to have to eventually have both sides of that. You, at some point, may need a tool, again, depending on the size of the organization, that is more specialized in terms of social media customer service, social media customer care. There's a real emerging field. A lot of the big software players are rolling out tools. HP has a new one. Clarabridge has its own they just acquired. There's a number of tools out there. Sprinklr has a big play in this space as well, sort of software that is specifically oriented around social media customer care. If you have a lot of you probably don't in a software play, but if you have an organization that has lots of physical locations, actual door fronts, that's when you need a tool like Yext, run by our old friend Jeff Roars, to kind of manage that side of it. On the measurement side, you may need some software or third-party help to do advanced measurement, but typically it's just more elbow grease and survey work. So the stack is not huge. Because it's software, you probably don't need ratings and reviews like a Bazaarvoice or similar on your own site. That's probably unnecessary. And so actually, from a software investment perspective, software companies, somewhat ironically, have it easier than consumer products.
Yeah, for sure. So from I'm gonna go over your 5-point plan here, since you just set it up. So from a personnel perspective, if we're looking at a company that might not have a customer success, customer service teams, looking at a CEO is looking to hire somebody, they're not going to put a job description out there for a retention hacker, even though that might be pretty cool. But what should be a first hire, and what capabilities should that person have? I mean, the top 3. Like, what should they be looking for? Should they go poach another customer service person, or is there a
I'll tell you what. No, you know what?
Right?
Here's the thing. No. In fact, I would argue that if you don't have anybody who's sort of whether this is their title or not is immaterial, who is the chief retention officer, director of customer success, the person who is ultimately responsible for keeping customers happy, if you don't have that job today, I would argue that the person to fill that job is probably in your company right now, because that first person is going to set the culture for everybody who comes after them in that team. And the best way to set that culture in a definitive, important way is to have somebody who's been with the company from the beginning, who really understands the culture of the company overall, and frankly knows where the skeletons are buried operationally. The challenge that a lot of companies have, especially as social media takes over customer service and more customer service interactions become a spectator sport and out in public and real time and all the things that I write about in the book, is the tendency to say, well, let's go get somebody who's right out of school, who's really good at social media, and put them in charge of customer care, because so much of what customers want to use now is Twitter and things like that. And these kids, quote unquote, grew up with that stuff. And I understand that tendency, but the reality, Kyle, is it's way easier to teach somebody Twitter than it is to teach somebody your company. And so find somebody in your organization who is sort of the rock, the sort of cultural center of your company, make them the director of customer success, and then fill their position from the outside. Think about somebody like Frank Eliason, right, who was a legendary customer service professional who I quote in the book was the director of customer success at Citigroup, at Comcast, and a bunch of other places. You know, he was just a guy. He was just a guy in the company who'd been there forever, who people loved, who really understood the spirit of the place. Like, yeah, you're in charge. They didn't bring somebody from the outside as a hired gun, at least not initially. So I think promoting from within is the secret to doing this right at the early stages.
Well, I was talking to our friend Tim Kopp, who was, of course, was my boss at ExactTarget as a CMO, and we were talking about where culture should be housed within an organization, and his argument that it should be in marketing and not HR, for good reason, right? I mean, do you think that the marketing function should own this if there isn't somebody in-house at the given moment? Because it's almost, I mean, it is external. It's about messaging. It's about the brand. It's making sure that the customer's happy. Like, why wouldn't marketing own this in a smaller company?
We're certainly seeing that in many smaller companies that aren't ready to have a separate department, quote unquote, for customer success, and maybe they never will. If you accept the premise that I talk about in the book over and over again, which is that customer service is the new marketing, that if you are disproportionately, measurably, and demonstrably better at customer service than your competition, then it becomes a marketing attribute, then it stands to reason that it's in marketing, as long as you don't blur the line too much between customer acquisition and customer retention because they're in marketing. You know, once you start saying, well, here's what's best for the customer, but, you know, we've got these numbers to hit, then you start kind of eroding the base of the mountain from a customer perspective. I don't necessarily agree with Tim that culture should be in marketing because marketing has its own culture that may not be shared with the rest of the organization. But as it relates to customer service and customer care, if you don't already have a department, then putting it in marketing is probably as good a place as any.
Okay, perfect. So tell us your favorite story from the book. You have a lot of them, and they're all great.
I intentionally have a lot of them.
What is your favorite example?
Oh man, there's a million.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be. It doesn't have to be a software. It could be consumer. Like, what's your favorite?
There are some really good software ones. There's some good software. I'll give you two that are smaller businesses, so a little bit more resonant. So one that I love is Le Pain Quotidien. And so Le Pain Quotidien is a chain of bakeries and cafes. They're headquartered in New York City. They're originally from Brussels. They have 238 locations. So they're not a tiny business, but they're not McDonald's either by any stretch of the imagination. And so when their head of marketing and guest relations, Erin Pepper is her name, when she started there 2 years ago, she said, hey, I want to get triple the number of complaints, which doesn't make any sense, right? You walk in, you're like, I want 3 times more complaints than we got last year. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? We're trying to get better, not worse. She said, well, here's the deal. Only 5% of unhappy customers ever complain in a way that you will find it. And that is very much true for software companies. Lots of your customers are bitching about the interface, they're unhappy about the billing, don't like when the server was down or any other circumstances, and all they do is complain to their coworkers and their friends. They never say anything to you, especially because a lot of software operators are passive-aggressive to begin with, and social media has made that even more so. So realize that the people who actually do take the time to complain, who raise their hands, who reach out on phone, email, social media, and beyond are doing you a favor, right? They're using their time to say, hey, I think you guys could do this better. So what Erin understands, in a way that almost nobody understands, is that if you can change that ratio from 5% of customers going on record to 15% of customers going on record with dissatisfaction, the amount of raw material you have to then understand operational weakness and make changes accordingly is extraordinary, right? Because praise is overrated. Like somebody saying, "Oh, you guys are great at this. We love your, we love your salads." Like I'm like, "Okay, well, thanks." I mean, it makes you feel terrific, but you don't learn anything from that. Negative feedback is where you learn all the important lessons. And so she says, "Give me more negative feedback." And then once you get that, then you can fix what ails you, and then you get fewer complaints. So the way I like to explain this, Kyle, is that the only way you can get fewer complaints is to first get more complaints, which isn't always easy, right? Because when you're basically saying bring on the negativity, you're like, all right, I'm going to have a shot of vodka first, but that's what you got to do. That's the way to make it happen. And so what she did is, I think, a great lesson for software companies. Is she went through and she audited every single place that they interact with customers. So in their business, it's everything from signage in the park, signage in the bathroom, to table tents on the tables, to tray liners, to what people say when a customer walks in the door, to what it says on the receipt when you check out. I'm like, all emails, all these different things. Audited all these different touch points, and she found a way to nudge customers to provide feedback in every single one of these locations. So if you go to the bathroom, like a big sign in the bathroom will say, "We want to know what you think. If anything is wrong, or even if it's right, please let us know, and you can contact us in any way, shape, or form." Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, email, text message, smoke signal, like whatever you want, we're listening. And she hit those goals. She got 3 or 4 times more feedback than they'd ever gotten in the past. And all you got to do is make it known that you actually care, and make it easy by allowing people to communicate in the channel that they prefer instead of the channel that you prefer.
So you said you had 2 stories. Don't cut us short here.
My other story is from a business in Texas, which is called Square Cow Movers. And Square Cow, as you might suspect, is a moving business. The moving business is really hard because, by definition, you're dealing with people who are on edge. Moving is never easy psychologically. It's fraught with uncertainty, and people are just freaked out, and you're touching their stuff, and nobody likes you touching their stuff anyway. And a lot of times people are under time pressure to get out or get in, and it's just dicey, right? It's just a dicey biz if you've ever moved, as I know you have relatively recently, Kyle. It's just a hard business. So Square Cow's good at it. I mean, these guys are a good mover, and they care deeply about their customers, and they have their act together. They're a good business. But they were still getting a lot of negative feedback from customers in phone, email, and Yelp. Those are the 3 main channels for them. They don't get as much in social. Phone, email, and Yelp. And so their owner, Wade Lombard, said, "Man, I don't understand this. Like, I feel like we're doing it right, but yet I keep seeing evidence to the contrary." And so he started to do what we talked about earlier, Kyle. He actually went through and did a deep analysis, not just of the fact that people were complaining, but specifically what were they complaining about. He did what we call at Convince and Convert, my consulting firm, an honesty audit, where we go through and look at samples of all the customer emails and phone calls and social messages and everything else, and look at the topics and how you responded and when you responded. It's an honesty audit. So he did one of those for himself. He realized that in almost every case, when people were complaining about their move, it was that they didn't understand something that they thought they should have understood. So it was what time people were showing up, or who was going to bring the blankets to wrap stuff around, or would the car have to be moved before or after, like all these sort of process things that are important in a moving situation. And a lot of them had been communicated to the customer either on the phone during the planning process at some point or via email. But despite that, the customers just didn't grok it, right? They forgot, or they never read it, or they didn't know, or they weren't paying attention. But through some shortcoming, they just didn't know. And so that lack of information, that lack of clarity on what was going to happen when, was creating this dissatisfaction and complaints. And so Wade called his whole team together and said, all right, here's the deal. I want you to go through and I want you to audit all the different places that we communicate to customers today. And I want you to write down all the different things that we tell them and where we tell them. and then I want you to find a way to double that. So if we have 7 different places and ways that we talk to customers and tell them what's going to happen, make it 14. People are like, how are we going to do that? No one's going to like that. We're going to over-communicate. And he said, guys, over-communication is a myth. And if customers don't understand something, that's our fault, not theirs. Double it. So they did. They doubled their communication chain with their customers, and guess what? Almost every complaint went away. And every single B2B company ought to get off this call, grab a piece of paper, write down all the times they tell customers about how the software works or what happens or billing policies or anything else that people bitch about, double the communication, solve those problems.
So would you say that's still the case for like promotional emails or just so if you're having, for example, if we have an event and we want to invite our CEOs or the CEOs want to invite their customers, like are you talking about just doubling communication anyway, or is this just specific to customer service?
I think it's specific to operations, right? And so in your case it might be, if people don't know how a particular thing works, right, or they don't know
right.
How OpenView works. I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, we're going to send 2 reminder emails about the event, now send 4, because that's not
right.
a case of miscommunication or undercommunication. Typically, it's an issue of relevance, which
right.
is a different thing.
Right, for sure. Okay, so I have one more question, then we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. My last one is, what is the most overrated thing in life? This is kind of a off-the-cuff question for Jay.
Well, I touched on it a second ago. I mean, I think the most overrated thing in life is when people tell you what you're good at. And people are always trying to get positive reviews, for example, on Yelp or G2 Crowd or TrustRadius or Spiceworks or whatever, and I get that. I mean, you want to have that nice average star rating of 4 point whatever, and I understand. And from a marketing perspective, that, hey, we want to have positive reviews because it makes people believe that we're a good company and all that, fine. But from a operations perspective, it doesn't actually help you because you in almost every case already know what you're good at. So to have that amplified or certified or reiterated isn't terribly useful. It doesn't really educate you. So I think what smart operators do, whether it's in the software business or my business or any other business, is they say, give me all the complaints. And I'll tell you, one of the people that I talked to for the book is Gary Vaynerchuk, who, Kyle, I'm sure many people on the call are familiar with Gary's work. And he said, look, I used to roll around in all the praise and thank people for positive comments. And he said, what I do now is I read and study every complaint because that's where the learnings come from.
Well, so this is more of a selfish question. I think that people could take that away for any aspect of business. How do you take that learning into like management of people? You've managed plenty of people in the past. You manage people now, right? The whole concept of praise is overrated. How would you build that into the management of the people on your team?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. So what we try and do is create for each person a very short list, because if it's too many things, no one can pay attention to it. It's hard to be actionable. I used to do it at my previous company. This is a few years ago. I would meet with each staff member every 90 days, and I would give them each an index card. And it was called the Cinco, and I wrote down the 5 things that I wanted them to do and work on in the next 90 days. So everybody in the company had one index card with the 5 things that I wanted them to fix or improve over the next 90 days. 91st day, you get a new card, and just focused on that kind of improvement was really, really useful.
Okay, so just a couple questions left from the audience. So when you're thinking about customer success, customer service, what are the right metrics What should people be thinking out in terms of how to measure success when they go out to do this?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you're at from that scaling perspective that we mentioned earlier. But I think at the basic level, you want to look at touches, right? So how many complaints are you getting, and not even just complaints, but customer touches, inquiries. How many of those are you getting by channel? So how many times does the phone ring? How many emails come in? How many Facebook comments, etc. So how many inquiries are there? Sort of opportunities, to say it in a different way. How many customer service opportunities do you get per month? How many of those do you actually act upon? So how many answers do you get? How often do you hug your haters as a percentage? Then you want to look at your overall customer retention rate, of course, and then you should probably also be looking at how long does it take you to respond on average per channel. Sometimes software packages have that included for the social media responses. So total number of opportunities, total number of issues handled, how long does it take you to do so by channel, and then ultimately what you want to do, and this requires a little manual effort, because customer retention you can figure out just through your business metrics, but from a specific customer service standpoint, some sort of net promoter score, how hard was it to get your question answered metric is really what you want, right? You want to be able to talk to customers either in whole or as a sample and say, how was this? Was this okay? One of my favorite examples, Kyle, is from a business called AppFolio. AppFolio is a newly public software company, SaaS model. They make software that helps property managers run their apartment complexes and stuff. Great guys, based in Santa Barbara. If you go to their website, appfolio.com, they have a real-time streaming feed of Net Promoter Score from every single customer that interacts with them, phone, email, or social media. So if you call them and say, hey, I can't figure out where to click for this report, they solve your problem, and then they say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how was it? How was their support? And then they take all those numbers, 6, 9, 5, 9, 9, 6, 5, with comments, and stream it live on their website. Talk about being accountable, right? Talk about putting your money where your mouth is, and talk about taking customer service and turning it into the new marketing. Bam!
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. That is great. It's going to give people a lot of ideas that CEOs are going to freak out about, have brain aneurysms over. So that's a good one.
Yeah, but that's good. That's good, because you know what? Here's the problem. The reason why most companies are only adequate at customer service, because for the CEO, it's been nothing but a necessary evil for 3 generations.
Right.
So before you do any of the things that we talked about, you have to, as an executive team, understand and believe that customer service can be a marketing advantage, that it does make you money, that it's not an expense. And if you can do that, if you kind of embrace that emotionally, then the rest of this becomes easier.
Perfect. Okay, last question from the audience. How do you figure out the right channels? And I think this has to go back to your 5 points. Like, how do you know what the right channels are to find complaints or whatever you were talking about from the 5-point standpoint?
Well, the nice thing is for software, you're going to have, generally speaking, a relatively tight set of channels. You're going to have email. You're going to have phone. You may or may not have a discussion board or forum dedicated to your software, but if nothing else, you should certainly be paying attention to any discussion boards or forums that are appropriate for your industry. You're going to have some social, but perhaps not as much social as other types of businesses, which is good news. And that's pretty much the list. So just have to make sure that people are paying attention, that it's somebody's job, right? It can't be like, hey, you know what we should do? We should go see if anybody's talking shit about us on a discussion board, right? That can't be like a Friday afternoon, hey, here's an idea. Like, it's got to be somebody's job to do that every day. And in a lot of companies, especially fast growth companies, it's just not. It's just not, and nobody's assigned to it. So the good news for B2B software is that your channel breadth isn't huge. The bad news is that a lot of times your customer complaints are it's not every hour, right? They come in somewhat infrequently, and so in order to answer them quickly, you got to be checking quickly and checking consistently, and that's a little bit hard.
Perfect. We actually have one more.
Okay.
From Jessica. This may be getting too deep into the book details, but one thing that you mentioned is to resolve in the first response as much as possible. Any tips or processes to follow when questions are complicated or involve troubleshooting?
There's two pieces to that. One, I say in the book that you should only reply twice. So you should never kind of get into a back and forth with customers in public, in social media, et cetera, because it just can get into a negative vortex that is counterproductive. But by the same token, you don't want to switch channels on the first reply. So in some cases, you have to switch channels because it is complicated. So for example, somebody complains on your Facebook page, and you answer back, "Hey, we're terribly sorry. That is going to require some troubleshooting. Tell me a little bit more about what you were doing." You have them just give you a little bit more information so that they realize that you respect their choice of channel, right? They complained on Facebook because that's what they chose. It wasn't random. It wasn't like channel customer service roulette for them. They are where they are because that's where they want to be. And so you've got to respect that and say, okay, take the first exchange and show them that you respect their channel choice. And then on the second response, you say, okay, yeah, that is going to require some digging. Could you please send me a private message on Facebook Messenger, and we can talk about it there, or call or email, or whatever you prefer. What a lot of people do is they answer in the first reply and say, okay, please call me at. And that doesn't respect their choice of channel. And it's also super dangerous because increasingly what happens in social is somebody already called, and they had to wait on hold, or they didn't like the answer they got there, so now they're going to social media as the channel of last resort. And when you say for the first response, now call us, they're like, bro, I just got off the phone with those guys, and now you're telling me to call again? And now people are supernova pissed. So you've got to be really careful about that.
Perfect. All right, Jay, we really appreciate your time. Everyone on the call, make sure you go buy Jay's book, at least 50 copies, right?
Also, important tip, Kyle, July 1st, so just not too long from now, we're going to roll out the Keep Your Customers course, which is a 52-video detailed course on exactly how to do all of this stuff. Super fired up about it. Details at hugyourhaters.com. Anybody who is on this call or is part of the OpenView network, we'll send out a promo code or something. I'll talk to Kyle Third how to do it. We're going to give you $200 off the course for anybody who's part of the OpenView world. We have 3 versions of the course: individuals, small groups, so people like three or 2 or 1 sort of customer service teams, and then we also have a package for bigger companies that have multiple people in customer success and a special deal for them as well. So if you really want to get deep on this and figure out exactly how to do it, use this playbook and this script and all that, the course is coming soon.
Perfect. So I'll connect with you. We will. All participants on the call will get an email from Casey or from OpenView, which will have the promo code in it, and we'll also have a recording of this presentation. And so, Jay, stay on the call. We'll get that information. Actually, I felt like a radio DJ just now. Stay on the call. Need to get your address.
That was good. That was good. I appreciate it. You're going to send me the LP from the Rupert Holmes record? Yeah, good.
Yeah, the new Jay Baer LP. Okay, so Jay, thank you. Everybody on the call, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.